I signed papers that said I'd never talk. I'm talking anyway because silence didn't save the men who saw it first. We were told we'd captured something, a specimen, non-terrestrial, non-cooperative, until it asked for me by name, not my rank, my name. Something that had never heard my voice knew it anyway. I keep asking myself what kind of intelligence reaches into a locked room, into a mind, and picks one man out of thousands. I don't have an answer. I have a warning. The first sign something was wrong was how quiet the officers got when they looked at me. My name is Corporal Daniel Reyes, and in the spring of 1958, I was pulled out of routine rotation with no explanation beyond a manila folder stamped in red ink. I wasn't cleared to read. 3 men in unmarked uniforms drove me 11 hours through desert roads that stopped appearing on any map I recognized. Nobody spoke. The radio in the Jeep played static, even when it was switched off. I had been a soldier for 6 years. I knew what fear looked like on a commanding officer's face, and I saw it that day, buried under a mask of procedure. When I asked where we were going, the driver said only, "Sector Dreamland," like the words themselves cost him something. We arrived at a facility that did not exist. I mean that literally. There was no name on the gate, no unit designation, nothing but a checkpoint manned by soldiers who searched me twice, confiscated my dog tags, and issued me a badge with no name on it, only a number. 7 Alpha. That was who I was now. Inside, the base looked ordinary at first. Barracks, mess hall, motor pool. The skeleton of any army post. But underneath that skin, something else pulsed. I felt it before I understood it. A vibration in the ground, low and constant, like the earth itself had a heartbeat. It came up through my boots, through my teeth. The kind of hum you don't hear so much as absorb. My CO, a colonel named Hollis, briefed me in a room with no windows. He told me I'd been assigned as asset liaison to a recovered object. He used that phrase, recovered object, like it was something that fell out of a truck, not out of the sky. "You'll receive further instructions when necessary," he said. "Until then, you don't ask questions, and you don't write letters home describing where you are, because as far as the Army is concerned, you aren't anywhere." I laughed, thinking it was some hazing ritual for new transfers. He didn't laugh back. His eyes held something that made my throat go dry. Not command, not discipline. Restraint. A man holding back words that would have broken protocol and maybe broken him. That first night, I lay on a bunk in a barracks with 4 other soldiers who wouldn't meet my eyes. One of them, a private named Kowalski, finally spoke after lights out. "You'll hear the hum," he whispered. "Everybody hears it eventually. Try not to listen too close." I asked what he meant. He didn't answer. He just pulled his blanket over his head like a child hiding from a storm. And within minutes I heard him crying, silent and controlled, like he'd practiced how to do it without sound. I told myself it was nerves, new assignment nerves. Every unit has its ghost stories, its warnings for the new guy. I was a soldier who had seen combat, who had learned to compartmentalize fear into something useful. I told myself, Sector Dreamland was no different, but the hum didn't stop. It threaded itself into my dreams that night, a low frequency that felt less like sound and more like pressure, like the air itself was being squeezed by something enormous, somewhere close, patient, waiting. At 0400 hours, I was woken by an alarm that wasn't an alarm, a tone that didn't match any drill I'd trained for. 3 descending notes that made the hair on my arms stand up before my mind even registered danger. Kowalski was already on his feet, pale, pulling on his boots with shaking hands. "Convoy briefing," he said. "That means transport day, means it's coming out of holding." "What's coming out?" He looked at me like I'd asked him to explain color to a blind man. "You'll see." We were marched to a motor pool where 3 armored transports waited, engines running, blackout curtains sealed across every window. Colonel Hollis stood at the lead vehicle, his jaw tight, his hands clasped behind his back, in a posture I recognized from men trying not to let their hands shake. Reyes, he said, you're riding in the second vehicle. You'll see nothing until we tell you to see it. Are we clear? I said yes, because that was the only answer that existed at Sector Dreamland. The convoy doors sealed behind me with a sound like a coffin closing, and in that total darkness, I felt the hum again, closer now, stronger, resonating up through the floor of the vehicle and into my spine. Somewhere ahead of us, inside a mountain that had no official name, something was waiting to be brought into the light. And whatever it was, it had already made grown men cry in their sleep before they ever saw its face. The moment the convoy doors opened, I understood why they'd sealed the windows. The doors didn't open into daylight. They opened into a throat. That's the only way I can describe it. A tunnel blasted into the mountainside, wide enough for 3 trucks abreast, lit by sodium lights that buzzed in a rhythm that didn't match the hum beneath it. 2 frequencies, fighting each other, neither one winning. My ears popped as we descended, like a plane losing altitude too fast, and the pressure kept building the deeper we went. When the transport finally stopped and the rear doors were unlatched, I stepped out into a hangar so vast my mind refused to measure it correctly. The ceiling disappeared into shadow above Klieg lights that couldn't reach it. Scaffolding wrapped around something at the center of the space, hidden behind canvas tarps the size of ship sails, and even from 100 feet away, I could feel that hum living inside my chest cavity, vibrating my ribs like a struck bell. Technicians in white coats moved between consoles with the careful, deliberate motion of men walking on ice. Nobody rushed. Nobody made eye contact. I watched one young researcher pour coffee with both hands wrapped around the pot, and even then, the liquid trembled in ripples that didn't match his movement, like something in the room itself was shaking, and he was simply catching the reflection of it. Colonel Hollis led me across the hangar floor, his boots echoing against concrete, and I noticed something that took me a moment to place. No birds, no insects. We were in the Nevada desert, and there was not a single sound of natural life anywhere in that mountain. Only machines, and underneath them, that hum, patient as a held breath. You'll meet Dr. Aldrich, Hollis said. She'll explain your role. I won't be joining you further inside. There was something in the way he said further inside, not reluctance, but refusal. A line he would not cross even under orders. I had never seen an officer refuse anything, and it did more to unsettle me than any alarm had. Dr. Eleanor Aldrich met us at a checkpoint of blast doors 3 feet thick, hydraulics hissing as they parted. She was younger than I expected, sharp-eyed, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Her hands, I noticed, were bandaged at the fingertips, the gauze yellowed with old iodine. "Corporal Reyes," she said, extending a bandaged hand anyway. "I've read your file, steady service record, no history of instability. That's why you're here. Why does that matter for a liaison job?" She studied me for a long moment before answering, choosing her words like a woman defusing something. "Because instability spreads down here," she said. "We need people who can hold a thought together under pressure. You'll understand what I mean soon enough." She led me through a corridor lined with monitors, seismographs, radiation counters, machines I didn't recognize with dials that swept erratically, needles slamming into red zones and retreating in patterns with no logic I could follow. On one screen, a waveform pulsed steadily, hypnotically, matching the hum in my bones almost perfectly. "Is that the specimen?" I asked, nodding at the waveform. "That's its presence," Aldrich said, "not its body. We're still working out the difference." The blast doors ahead of us led to a chamber sealed in reinforced glass and layered steel mesh, guarded by 4 soldiers holding rifles they hadn't been trained to aim at anything like what waited inside. Aldrich gestured toward a viewing window, and against every instinct telling me to look away, I stepped forward and looked. The lights inside the chamber flickered, not from a malfunction, but in a rhythm, 3 slow pulses and a pause, over and over, patient as a heartbeat learning to speak. And in that flickering dark, I saw something crouched at the center of the room that made my mind refuse, for 1 full second, to process what my eyes were sending it. It was tall, inhumanly so, folded into itself like something too large for the space containing it. Its skin, if it was skin, had the wet black sheen of obsidian under rain, catching light it shouldn't have been able to catch, bending it at angles that hurt to track. I searched for eyes and found none, and yet the moment I looked at it, I felt looked at in return, a pressure behind my own eyes, cold and specific, like a hand closing gently around the back of my skull. "Sweet Christ," I whispered. "That's the reaction everyone has," Aldrich said quietly. "The instruments read it as simultaneously present and absent. Mass without matching density. Heat signature without a heartbeat. We don't have a vocabulary for what it is. We only have instruments, and the instruments are starting to disagree with each other." I laughed. A short, brittle sound, born purely of nerves, the kind of laugh a man makes standing at the edge of something too large to be real. "You're telling me the equipment doesn't work?" "I'm telling you the equipment works fine," she said. "It's reality that started disagreeing with itself." As if in answer, the lights above the containment chamber flickered again, 3 pulses, a pause. And this time, every monitor in the corridor flickered in perfect unison, the waveforms spiking into shapes that looked less like data and more like a signature, deliberate, aimed, and aware of exactly who was watching it. Then the humming stopped, and it was replaced by something worse: silence with intent. Silence has a texture when it's wrong. That night, I learned what it felt like against my skin. The hum that had followed me since the moment I arrived at Sector Dreamland vanished all at once, mid-step, like someone had reached out and switched off a frequency that had been holding the entire base together. The abruptness of it staggered me more than the sound ever had. Every technician in the monitoring corridor froze at their stations. Dr. Aldrich's hand hovered over a keyboard, unmoving, her breath visible in air that had turned suddenly, impossibly cold. "That's never happened," she said, so quietly I almost didn't hear her. "Not once. Not in 14 months." I asked her what it meant. She didn't answer. She was staring past me, toward the viewing window. And when I turned to follow her gaze, I understood why her face had drained of color. The creature inside the chamber had moved. Not shifted, not twitched. Moved fully from its crouched position at the center of the room to a spot directly beneath the observation window, close enough now that I could see details the distance had spared me before. Its surface wasn't smooth as I'd first thought, but faintly textured, like the skin was made of something closer to layered smoke, held together by will rather than structure. And where I had failed to find eyes before, I now understood why. It didn't need them. Somehow, it had always known exactly where I was standing. Dr. Aldrich's team convened an emergency assessment that night, and I was ordered to remain. Asset liaison, they reminded me, whatever that title actually meant. I sat in a briefing room while scientists argued in hushed, clipped sentences about readings that made no sense. Matter registering at negative mass in isolated pockets, temperature gradients that inverted without cause, radioactive decay rates in nearby materials that had slowed to a near halt, as though time itself moved differently within a 6-foot radius of the chamber. "We've run every test twice," said a physicist named Corwin, his voice cracking with exhaustion. "The math doesn't fail gracefully. It fails completely. Like the rules aren't bent. They're being renegotiated." Aldrich pressed her bandaged fingers against her temples. "Show him the audio." A technician played a recording captured from a directional microphone aimed at the chamber 3 nights prior. At first, there was nothing, the ordinary hiss of empty tape. Then, faint beneath the static, a sound emerged that made my stomach drop before my brain identified it. A voice, low, resonant, speaking in no language I recognized, and yet beneath the alien cadence of it, I caught something horribly, impossibly familiar. It was shaping itself, syllable by syllable, into something like English. "It's learning to talk," I said. "No," Corwin replied, his hands trembling as he stopped the tape. "It already knows how. It's learning which of us to talk to." I didn't sleep that night. None of us did, I think. I lay in my bunk, listening for the hum to return, and its absence felt worse than its presence ever had, like standing in a house gone quiet after a fight. waiting for the next sound to tell you what happens next. At 0300, the base-wide intercom crackled to life without anyone touching it. Every speaker in the facility, from the barracks to the mess hall to the deepest containment corridor, produced the same 3 seconds of white noise, and then, beneath it, a single word, spoken in a voice built from many overlapping voices, none of them quite matching. Reyes. I sat upright so fast I cracked my head against the bunk frame above me. Kowalski was already awake, staring at the ceiling speaker, his face bloodless. "That's you," he whispered. "That's your name." I told myself it was a glitch, a recorded fragment, some technician running tests on the comm system at an ungodly hour. I told myself that all the way to Dr. Aldrich's office, where I found her already awake, already waiting, her expression unreadable in the low light. "You heard it," she said. It wasn't a question. Someone said my name over the intercom. "No one said anything, Corporal. There's no transmission logged, no open channel, no human voice anywhere in this facility spoke those words." She turned her monitor toward me, and I saw a waveform capturing the exact moment of the broadcast. A signal with no discernible source, radiating outward from the containment chamber itself, 3 floors and a mountain's worth of rock away from the nearest speaker. "It came from the specimen," I said, the words tasting wrong in my mouth even as I spoke them. "It came from somewhere," Aldrich corrected. "We don't know that 'from' means what you think it means anymore." I laughed again, that same brittle sound, because laughing felt like the only defense I had left against a truth too large to hold steady in my mind. Aldrich didn't laugh with me this time. She simply watched me, the way a doctor watches a patient for the first symptom of a disease already known to be fatal. And in her silence, I understood, with a cold certainty that settled into my bones like the desert night itself, that whatever was inside that chamber hadn't just learned my name. It had chosen it. I laughed off her words until the lights flickered in a pattern too deliberate to be a malfunction. The lights above the corridor pulsed 3 times, paused, and pulsed 3 times again, the same rhythm I'd seen behind the containment glass, now bleeding into the architecture of the base itself, as if the building had started breathing in time with something buried at its center. I was ordered to report for direct observation duty the following morning, a task no one explained and everyone dreaded. Colonel Hollis briefed me personally this time, standing rigid in a room lit only by a single caged bulb, his voice flattened into the monotone of a man reciting something he didn't believe. "The specimen has requested contact," he said, "specifically with you. Command has authorized limited observation. You will not speak first. You will not approach the glass. If anything occurs that Dr. Aldrich deems unsafe, you will exit immediately and without hesitation." "Sir, why me?" Hollis's jaw tightened, the muscle working beneath skin gone gray with exhaustion. "Because it asked for you by name, Corporal, and we don't have the luxury of ignoring that request when we don't understand how it was made in the first place." I walked to the containment corridor flanked by 2 guards who wouldn't meet my eyes, past monitoring stations where technicians had started taping paper over their instrument readouts, unable or unwilling to keep watching numbers that no longer obeyed physics. The air grew colder with every step, a cold that had weight to it, pressing against my chest like something standing too close behind me, though I was alone in that hallway. Dr. Aldrich was waiting at the viewing window, her bandaged hands folded in front of her, her expression carved from careful control. "Whatever happens," she said, "don't look away first. I don't know what that means to it, but every instinct I have tells me it matters." I stepped up to the glass. The creature was already there, closer to the window than I'd ever seen it, its form somehow both smaller and vaster than my mind could reconcile, as if my eyes kept receiving 2 contradictory images of the same object and my brain simply refused to choose between them. Where a face should have been, there was only that dark, rippling surface, and yet I felt, with total and undeniable certainty, that it was looking directly into me. The lights flickered. 3 pulses. A pause. And then the voice came again. Not through speakers this time, not through any conductive medium I could identify, but inside my own skull, in my own voice, using my own inflection, as though something had reached into my mind, borrowed my vocal cords without my permission, and used them to speak back to me from somewhere I couldn't locate. "Reyes," it said, "you came." I stumbled back from the glass, my heart slamming against my ribs, my breath fogging in air gone suddenly frigid enough to numb my fingertips. Behind me, I heard Aldrich's sharp intake of breath, and I realized, from the horror on her face, that she had heard it too, not through any microphone, but directly, the same way I had. "It's in both our heads," she whispered. "Dear God, it's not transmitting sound. It's transmitting directly." "What does it want?" I said, my voice cracking. The creature tilted forward and motioned with no discernible joints, no hinge point my eyes could track, simply a reorientation of its entire form toward me, like a plant turning toward light it had been starving for. "It wants you to understand," Aldrich said slowly, watching the readouts beside her spike into patterns none of us had vocabulary for. "Corporal, it's brainwave signature, if that's even the right term anymore. It's synchronizing with yours." I felt it then, a pressure behind my eyes that wasn't pain exactly, but presence, the unmistakable sensation of something vast pressing gently against the inside of my skull, testing the walls of my own mind, the way a man might test ice before stepping onto a frozen lake. Images flickered at the edge of my vision, not things I was seeing, but things I felt I should be seeing. A sky split open like torn fabric, countless shapes moving behind it, patient, ancient, uncountable. I staggered backward, gasping, and the connection severed as suddenly as it had begun, leaving me on my knees on the cold concrete floor, my nose bleeding freely, dark spots crowding the edge of my vision. Aldrich knelt beside me, pressing a cloth to my face, her hands shaking despite her training. "Talk to me, Reyes. Stay with me." "It showed me something," I gasped. "The sky. It showed me the sky breaking." Behind the glass, the creature had gone still again, folded back into its original crouch, but something had changed in the quality of its stillness, a satisfaction perhaps, or the patience of something that has just planted a seed and is content now simply to wait for it to grow. Colonel Hollis's voice crackled over the intercom, tight with barely restrained panic. "Dr. Aldrich, report to command immediately. We have a situation at the perimeter. Something's happening to the sky." 4 lost minutes were nothing compared to what I'd lose next. I want to describe what I saw with precision, because precision is the only defense I have left against the possibility that I imagined it. Command had ordered a full facility lockdown by the time Aldrich and I reached the surface access corridor, soldiers running in both directions with an urgency that had abandoned all pretense of composure. Through a reinforced viewport near the mountain's exterior door, I caught my first glimpse of the desert sky since arriving at Sector Dreamland, and what I saw stopped my legs from carrying me forward. The sky above the base had a crack in it. Not clouds, not lightning, not any weather phenomenon I could name. A fracture, hairline thin but impossibly long, stretching from horizon to horizon like a windshield struck by something too massive to comprehend. And through that fracture, for one unbearable moment, I saw light that didn't belong to our sun, layered and shifting, the color of something between violet and a color that had no name in any language I possessed. "That's not possible," I said, the words feeling absurd even as I spoke them, as if possibility itself had become a luxury I could no longer afford. "Nothing here is possible, Corporal," Aldrich said, her voice hollow. "That's the entire problem." Hollis intercepted us before we reached command, his face gray, sweat beading despite the cold. "Command wants direct contact reattempted," he said. "They think the anomaly and the specimen's activity are connected. They want you back in that room, Reyes." "With respect, sir, did you see the sky?" "I saw it," he said, and something in his voice broke slightly, a crack of its own running through decades of discipline. "I've been briefed on things in this program I never wanted to know, and I am telling you, son, that what's happening now is worse than anything in those files. Get back in that room. I don't remember agreeing. I remember walking, flanked by guards whose hands trembled around their rifles, back through corridors where the walls themselves seemed subtly wrong, angles that didn't add up the way they should, a hallway that felt longer walking in than walking out, though the distance never changed on any blueprint. Aldrich led me not to the observation window this time, but to a heavy door beside it, sealed with manual locks in addition to its electronic ones. "Direct entry," she said. "Command's orders. I want it on record that I object." "Noted," Hollis said grimly, standing behind her. "Objection noted and overridden." The door hissed open, and I stepped inside the containment chamber for the first time. The moment the door sealed behind me, I understood why Kowalski had refused to describe what waited inside these walls. The room, from the observation window, had appeared to be a simple rectangular space: steel walls, reinforced glass, a single caged light overhead. But standing within it, I saw immediately that the corners were wrong. Where two walls should have met at a 90-degree angle, they instead seemed to fold into each other and away simultaneously, producing an afterimage of additional walls that flickered at the edge of my vision and vanished the instant I tried to look directly at them. I turned in place, and the room turned with me, subtly, wrongly, like the geometry itself was reorienting to keep some invisible center point locked in relation to my body. My shadow, cast by the single overhead light, moved across the floor a half-second before I did. I would take a step, and only after my foot had already landed would the shadow catch up, stretching unnaturally to close the gap, like reality itself was lagging behind my own actions. The creature was there, at the center of the room, closer than it had ever been permitted to come, and this time it did not wait for the lights to pulse before it spoke. "You saw it," it said in my voice, inside my skull, gentle in a way that terrified me more than aggression would have. "The sky. It has always been thin here, thinner than you were told." "What are you?" I managed, my voice shaking, my breath clouding in air gone glacial. "A door," it said, "not the one that matters." Behind me, I heard Aldrich's voice crackle faintly through an intercom I hadn't noticed, tinny and distant, as though the sound itself was struggling to reach me across some distance greater than the room's actual dimensions. "Reyes, your vitals are spiking. Corporal, respond." I tried to answer her, but my mouth wouldn't move the way I intended. Time had become elastic in that room. I would blink and find myself standing in a different spot than where I remembered standing, with no memory of the steps between. I checked my watch on instinct, a soldier's habit, and found its hands frozen at a time that didn't match any moment I could account for. "How long have I been in here?" I asked, panic climbing into my throat. The creature tilted, that same jointless reorientation, and I felt, more than heard, something that might have been sympathy in its next words. "Longer than they think, shorter than you fear." The door behind me hissed open without anyone touching it, and Aldrich's voice, no longer distorted, was suddenly screaming my name at full volume, her face white with a horror I didn't yet understand. I stumbled out into the corridor, my legs unsteady, and it was only when I caught sight of the wall clock outside the chamber that the true scope of what had happened settled into my chest like a stone. 4 hours had passed. I remembered perhaps 4 minutes of it. I left that room a different length of time than I entered it. 4 hours gone from my life, and no one could tell me where they had gone, only that something in that chamber had taken them without asking. Aldrich ran a battery of tests on me in the medical wing. Blood pressure, reflexes, cognitive assessments, searching for damage she couldn't name in a body that seemed, by every clinical measure, unharmed. But I felt the absence of those hours like a wound beneath the skin, an ache in a limb that wasn't there. When I closed my eyes, I caught fragments. The sensation of the room's false corners folding around me, the creature's voice repeating a single phrase I couldn't fully recall no matter how hard I tried. Something about doors, about thinness, about a version of the sky I wasn't meant to see yet. The base-wide alert sounded 40 minutes into my examination, not the 3-note tone I'd learned to dread, but a full siren, raw and continuous, the kind reserved for catastrophic failure. Aldrich and I ran for the surface level, joining a crowd of soldiers and technicians already gathering at the exterior viewports, their faces lit by a light that shouldn't have existed above the Nevada desert. The fracture in the sky had widened. What had been a hairline crack now stretched into a visible seam, wide enough that I could make out movement within it, not clouds, not aircraft, but shapes, vast beyond any scale I could reconcile with the horizon they hung against, drifting with a slow, deliberate patience that suggested awareness rather than mere motion. And at the heart of that widening fracture, unmistakable even at that impossible distance, something opened that I can only describe, God forgive me, as an eye. Vast beyond comprehension, its surface swirling with colors that had no place in any spectrum I'd learned in basic training or in life before the Army. And it was not looking at the base. It was looking at everything at once, the way the sky itself might look if the sky had ever been capable of looking back. Soldiers around me began shouting, some running for weapons that could do nothing against a sky, others simply standing frozen, weeping without shame, their discipline shattered by a sight too large for any training to prepare them for. Colonel Hollis stood rigid at the command console, barking orders into a radio that crackled with static instead of answers, his composure fracturing visibly with every second the fissure widened. "Command, this is Hollis. We have a Class 1 containment breach of the..." He stopped, unable to finish the sentence, because there was no category in any manual for what was breaching containment. It wasn't the specimen. It was reality itself, thinning at the seams around the thing we had locked in a box 3 stories beneath our feet. Dr. Aldrich grabbed my arm, her bandaged fingers digging into my jacket with a strength I hadn't expected from her exhausted frame. "Reyes, the specimen. Its containment readings. They're synchronized with the fissure. It's not causing this. I think it's a symptom of it. I think whatever's tearing that sky has been tearing it long before we ever found the specimen, and we just happened to notice when it got close enough to see." "Then what is it?" I shouted over the growing roar, because sound had begun bleeding through the fissure now, a low resonant tone that matched, with sickening precision, the hum I'd first felt in my boots on the day I arrived, except 1,000 times louder, felt in my molars, in the marrow of my bones. "I don't think it has a name we could survive hearing," Aldrich said. The ground shuddered. Not an earthquake, a vibration too rhythmic, too deliberate, pulsing in time with the fissures widening, as if the earth itself were flinching beneath something vast pressing down from above, testing the thickness of the world the way a man tests ice, exactly as the creature had tested the walls of my mind. Somewhere behind us, deep within the mountain, an alarm different from all the others began to wail. The unmistakable sound of a containment breach, real this time, physical, and I understood with sick certainty what was about to happen a full second before Hollis's radio confirmed it. "Containment Chamber 4 has opened from the inside," the radio crackled. "Repeat, the specimen is out." I turned toward the mountain, toward the corridor I had walked out of not an hour before, and in the reflection of the viewport glass, I saw a shape moving through the base's interior lights, tall, dark, jointless, moving not with urgency, but with the calm, unhurried certainty of something that had never once been contained to begin with. Only waiting, patiently, for the moment its door was finally wide enough to walk through. General Hollis screamed an order that made no sense until I understood. We were never the ones in control of this facility. Hollis's voice broke over the radio in a register I had never heard from him, raw and stripped of every rank he'd ever held. "Evacuate the mountain. All personnel, all levels. Evacuate now. That is not a drill, I repeat. That is not a..." The transmission dissolved into static, and in the same instant, every light in the facility died at once, plunging the corridors into a darkness so total it felt like a physical substance pressing against my eyes. Emergency lighting flickered on seconds later, bathing everything in a sickly red that did nothing to steady the panic rising in my chest. I don't know how to describe what happened next without sounding like a man who has lost his mind, but I promise you, on whatever oath still means anything to me, that I am recounting this as clearly as memory allows. Soldiers around me began seeing different things. A private near the stairwell dropped his rifle and began screaming that we were underwater, clawing at his throat as though drowning, though the air around us was as dry and thin as any Nevada night. A sergeant I'd shared a meal with just hours before grabbed my collar, his eyes wide with a terror that had nothing sane behind it, and told me, in a voice flattened by shock, that we had all been dead since 1953, that the base was a memory replaying itself, that none of what we were experiencing had actually been real for 5 years. A technician sat against the wall repeating a string of numbers under his breath, over and over, coordinates to nowhere, his voice never wavering from the same flat cadence, as though something had installed the phrase in him like a recording set to loop. I felt it too, a pressure at the edges of my own perception, images bleeding into my vision that didn't belong to the corridor around me, flashes of a sky I recognized from the creature's earlier contact, vast shapes moving behind torn fabric, a sense of scale so enormous it made my body flinch on instinct, bracing against a weight that wasn't physically present. "It's not attacking us," Aldrich shouted over the chaos, gripping my arm hard enough to anchor me to the moment. "It's letting us see. Reyes, I think proximity to it lets people perceive fragments of what it perceives, and none of us are built to hold that much at once." Ahead of us, in the flickering red emergency light, the creature moved through the corridor with unhurried, fluid grace. Untouched by the gunfire, 2 soldiers unloaded into it from point-blank range. Bullets that seemed to strike a half-second late, catching an afterimage of where the creature's body had been rather than where it currently stood, as though its position in time had come loose from ours entirely. I watched a captain empty his sidearm into it and then turn the weapon on himself, not out of malice, but out of some horrified certainty that his own mind was the more urgent threat to eliminate. Aldrich screamed his name, too far away to stop him, and the sound she made afterward was not the sound of a scientist. It was the sound of a person watching the last shred of order in her world collapse into something with no name and no mercy. I don't remember all of what happened in that corridor. I remember pieces, out of order, the way you remember a fever, Kowalski on his knees, laughing and weeping at once, saying he finally understood why the birds had left. A wall that briefly wasn't a wall, showing me, for less than a second, thank God, less than a second, an expanse of something vast and dark and endlessly textured with what might have been eyes, or might have been something my mind translated into eyes because it had no other shape to give the horror. Dr. Aldrich dragging me bodily down a side corridor, her bandaged hands slick with someone else's blood, screaming at me to keep moving, to not look back, to not listen to anything that sounded like my own voice. The creature passed within 10 feet of us at one point, moving toward the exterior blast doors with the calm of something that had never once needed to hurry. And as it passed, I felt, one final time, that voice inside my skull, quieter now, almost gentle, almost grieving. "You were never contained," it said. "None of you ever were." Then the exterior blast doors, 3 feet of reinforced steel designed to withstand a direct nuclear strike, opened from the outside without a single alarm registering the breach, and beyond them, the fractured sky poured down light that had no source and no mercy, and the creature walked out into it, unhurried, and was gone. When the horror finally stopped, it wasn't because we had won anything. The silence that followed felt less like victory and more like a held breath finally released by something far larger than us, satisfied for now that it had seen enough. When the horror finally stopped, it wasn't because we won. It was because it let us stop. 6 of us walked out of that mountain. I don't know how many walked in, because I was never given the actual roster, only a number that meant I had once been one of them. The debriefing that followed was not a debriefing so much as an erasure. Men in suits I never saw again told the 6 of us, individually, in separate rooms, that nothing had happened at Sector Dreamland. Not the Fisher, not the specimen, not the 4 hours I'd lost inside a room with no true corners. They didn't threaten us, not directly. They didn't need to. They simply explained, calmly, that our service records would reflect a training exercise in California, that our families had already been informed of the same, and that any deviation from that story would be handled through channels none of us wanted described to us in detail. I signed the papers. All 6 of us did. What choice does a man have? Staring across a table at people who have already rewritten his own past more convincingly than he can remember living it. I was discharged 8 months later on a medical designation, vague enough to mean nothing to anyone who might ask. I went home to a small house outside Barstow, and I tried for a while to build a life around the shape of a man who had never seen a sky crack open like a struck window, who had never felt something ancient and patient press gently against the inside of his own skull and call him by name. It didn't work, not entirely. Some nights, usually the quiet ones, I still hear the hum, faint, distant, a frequency that lives somewhere just beneath the threshold of what my ears can properly register, and I understand, with a certainty, that no amount of ordinary life has managed to erase, that it never fully stopped. I think it never will. I looked for Dr. Aldrich once, years later, using channels I probably shouldn't have still remembered. I found only a name on a research paper published under someone else's authorship, and beneath the acknowledgments, a single line that might have meant nothing, or might have meant everything, for those who saw what they were not meant to see, and carried it anyway. I don't know what became of the creature. I don't know if it walked out into our world that night, or if it walked into something else entirely, using our world only as a threshold, a door it needed to pass through on its way to somewhere we have no language to describe. I have thought about this more than any sane man should be allowed to think about anything, and the conclusion I keep arriving at is the one that frightens me most. It didn't need our world. It was simply passing through it, the way a man passes through a room he has no interest in staying in. And the horror we lived was, to whatever that thing was, barely a disturbance at all. I think about the eye in that fractured sky sometimes, vast and patient, looking at everything at once with no particular urgency, and I understand now what Dr. Aldrich meant when she said its readings suggested it was simultaneously present and absent. We were never significant enough to hold its full attention. We were noticed the way a man notices an insect crossing his path, briefly, incidentally, without malice, and just as quickly forgotten. That, I have come to believe, is the true horror of what happened at Sector Dreamland. Not that something monstrous invaded our world, but that our world was never as separate from it as we believed. That the sky above us has always been thin in places, that the barrier between what we call reality and whatever waits behind it is closer to the surface than any of us were ever meant to know, and that somewhere, patient beyond our understanding of the word, something vast continues to watch, waiting for the moment the seam widens again. I am an old man now, and I have made a kind of peace with the fact that I will likely die without ever learning the true name of what asked for me that night, or why, out of every soldier in that mountain, it chose to speak in my own voice first. But some nights, when the hum returns, faint and distant beneath the desert wind, I find myself wondering if peace was ever the right word for what I've settled into. I think, more honestly, it is simply waiting, the same patient waiting I felt from that creature, inherited now, perhaps, as the only thing it truly left behind in me. We were never in control of Sector Dreamland. I don't think we were ever meant to be. This story is inspired by documented wartime reports, blended with folklore, and dramatized for narrative purposes.